Welcome everyone to the Yosan University 39 Gen podcast. I am your new host, Emily, and I am so excited to be here with a return guest of ours, somebody who needs no introduction if you know anything about Yosan, Dr. Robert Hoffman. But for those of us who may be joining us for the first time and don't know you, give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you do at Yosan.
Sure. Well, first, thank you. Thank you for diving in, jumping in, taking over this role. I know it's a huge ask, and we're really grateful to have you here. So thanks for that, first of all. I am the president and CEO of Yosan, also an alumni, and previously I was the doctoral dean here as well. So all told, I've actually been on campus now for 16 years. I think I'm never leaving. But yeah, I came here as a student originally in 2010, and kind of went away for a few years to get my doctoral degree and start my private practice, and then came back in 2019 to be the doctoral dean, and then around the end of 22 became the CEO and president.
You have a rich history with Yosan.
Yeah.
But you also have a big history before you came to Yosan. Something that is really, we joked is kind of more of a footnote in your bio that you mentioned, but really is a 30-year career. So tell us what you did before you came to Yosan.
Yeah, I mean, I think for so many acupuncturists, it tends to be a second career. And certainly when I was in school, like when I think back, the demographic then, in 2010 was mostly second career adults, people. And the demographic was probably like 35 to 50. And now with the classes graduating, we said that demographic has really shifted to first career as young as 21, 22 years old, up to about 35. And there's always some outliers, who are still second or third career choice. For me, prior to doing this, I was in the music industry. So really before I even graduated from my undergrad, I was working in the music business. I was writing songs. I was writing jingles in New York on the East Coast, and spent the first, 15, 16 years of my kind of adult life post-college in the music business, and then have continued to do that really up until this year. I would say that this year I can kind of officially sort of say that I'm retired from the music business, but I'm saying that also knowing that I just had a conversation with my wife that I was also starting to feel the itch too. So I don't know that I'll ever truly leave it, but I basically was working in the music industry for 30-ish years. As a songwriter, recording engineer, producer, at a fairly high level for quite a long time.
See, that's the thing about first careers is they never truly leave you. And I think
No.
that's really the most interesting thing about TCM is that so many people come to it with a background in a completely different field. And really, I think our field, a lot of the growth happens because you have so many different perspectives in the room at a given time, really.
Yeah. And I think music actually prepared me for that in a way. So, I mean, going a little further back than college, I always had kind of multiple interests. Like I loved sports and surfing. I've been surfing since I was 8 years old. And then I got into music at a young age. I played piano and guitar, and with the school band, I played trombone and saxophone. So even before I was in high school, I played like 3 or 4 instruments. And then I started to do martial arts as well, because I was a boy growing up in the 70s and 80s. So I was inundated with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris and Kung Fu theater on Sundays. And it was because of Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, it was very out front in the American zeitgeist for young boys, especially. But as I got older, it was kind of like, well, what do I want to do? I was the first person in my family to go to college. Like, who am I going to be? And it was like, I didn't want to be a karate instructor. I knew that. And I was good at sports, but I knew I wasn't going pro. I had lots of friends that became like professional football players and were in the Olympics and all these kinds of things, but I was never really that. My dad was dying for me to be an attorney, and that, no.
That would have been very interesting knowing you.
Yeah, I don't think I could have done that. And then, I loved music. Like in college, I was always in bands. I was a music minor. And I realized through college that I really wanted music to be my life. I enjoyed being in the studio for 12 hours a day. I took every opportunity I could to be in the studio and play. So through college, I began to think about like, well, how do you do that, right? Think of, this is 1989, no internet, right? Like how do you get in the music industry? Like, how do you get behind the scenes too, not just be in a band? That was hard for my family to understand. So I actually went to the library and I got on the microfiche machines and I looked up, like, I don't remember what they were at the time, but basically like Bureau of Labor statistics, like what does a recording engineer make? Like what is the career path? And I found all these statistics, and I went to my dad and I said, like, I'm going to be a recording engineer and a record producer. And he was like, what? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, look, here are the statistics. And I actually like prepared a report.
Bureau of Labor statistics.
Yeah, no, I prepared. I was a business major at the time, and I'm like, here's my report. Here's what I've got. And he was like, all right, you got it together. And he said, he made me, I had one promise that I had to make. He said, if you're not making a living by the time you're 30, you're going to reverse course and you'll go to law school and I'll pay for it. And I was like, I got 10 years to make this. Like, let's see, like, deal. And I have a fallback. My family will help me pay for law school. Like, I'm in, I'll do this. So that summer, I got a job. I got an internship at an ad agency, no pay, living at home, taking the train from New Jersey to New York City, with the sole intention of writing music, writing jingles for them. And by the end of the summer, it happened. They came to me and said, we need, like, by tomorrow, we need a jingle for this company in, I think it was Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Repertory Theater. I don't even know if that still exists, but I had to write a jingle. So they're like, can you deliver this? Can you come back with a jingle tomorrow? And I was like, absolutely. So I left work early that day. I stopped at Sam Ash on 48th Street, which every New Yorker knows was where all the music stores were. And I bought like a couple extra pieces of equipment that I need. I maxed out my student Visa card and I went home and I wrote a couple jingles, a couple pieces of music, and showed up the next day with a tape and said, here's the jingles. And my boss at the time played them, and then he played them over the phone to the client, and they loved it. And I went home that day with a check and like showed my parents, like, look, you can make money at this. And they were like, oh my God. So that was like my first like real paying gig, not as a musician, not playing in a bar or something. And then it just kind of spiraled from there. I graduated from Skidmore College with my bachelor's in business and a minor in music. And then I went to a school, again, this is, early 90s, 91, 92 is when I graduated. You didn't have a laptop with essentially a recording studio in it. Everything was massive. You had to learn how to use a huge recording console. You had to learn how to use like multiple computer systems to make music. So I went for one more year to a school called Full Sail University, which is in Florida, in Orlando. And it was a 1-year associate's program. So normally associate's program 2 years. This was shoved into 1 year. We had class 6 days a week. We had lab at like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. It was like designed to, I think it was designed to attrition people out, essentially. It was like, we think about how much hand-holding we do in higher education now. The first day of that school, the dean of the students said, look to the people on your left and look to the people on your right. 30% of you will not be here in 6 months. It was like, this is hard. And they tried to scare you out of music school. It was that intense. But I graduated from there. And actually, funny story, the last 2 months before we graduated, you have to meet with a career counselor. And they say, like, what's your plan? Like, do you have applications in? Are you going home? Are you staying in Florida? So I said, my plan is I'm going to go, I want to work at a big recording studio in New York City. and I want to work with Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson, and I want to work with their production team. So Michael's producer and engineer was Bruce Swedian and Quincy Jones, and Janet Jackson's producers and co-writers were a duo named Jam and Lewis. And I said, these are the people I want to work with. And the guy looked at me, he dropped a lot of curse words, and he said, get out of here and come back when you have a real plan, because everybody wants to do what you say you're going to do. And I was like, okay. I never went back. 2 months later, I started working at the Hit Factory in New York City, which was the biggest recording studio in New York at the time, and arguably one of the biggest recording studios in the country at the time. And that was, October of 93. By January of 94, I was working with Michael Jackson and Bruce Swedian. By fall of that year, I was still working with Michael, but I was also working with Janet Jackson and her producers. And then by summer of 95, I was working with Quincy Jones. So I did what I said I was going to do. The hours were really intense. I ended up working with Michael for about 3 years. We worked 7 days a week, sometimes 20 hours a day, no breaks, no vacations. You were lucky if you got sick, you could stay home for a couple days. But that's the project that also brought me to Los Angeles. So in the fall of 94, Michael, who'd been working in New York that whole year, said, I really want to finish in Los Angeles. So that project brought me to Los Angeles. And I tell this story all the time because it's now 30 years that I've been here. When I left New York, it was mid-December. It was cold and raining and gross. And I got to LA and it was like it is today, 80 degrees and sunny. And I called my mom and I said, I'm sorry. Like, I'm never coming home. I'm never going to be in snow unwillingly again. And I stayed out here. I shipped all my stuff out here and I never went back to New York. I mean, I visited, of course, but I never lived anywhere else but Los Angeles since then.
Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is called manifestation.
Yeah.
To the highest extent.
Yeah, careful what you ask for. But it was really, I take so much of what I learned in music, right, and apply it both in Chinese medicine, but also in the running of the school. I've told this story before, like when I worked with Quincy, who's one of the greatest producers in the history of recorded music, and just, he was an incredibly sweet person. He passed away last year. What I loved about his productions, and the reason I wanted to work with him, was that he always surrounded himself with incredible musicians, right? It was always about like, who's the best at doing this thing? And he told me, like, one night at dinner, he's like, wherever you go in your life, if you're making music or whatever, he's like, you want to surround yourself with people who are better than you, who are smarter than you, right? Don't be the best one in the room, because then the limitation is put on you and your skills or your talents or your intelligence or your ability. He's like, but if you can fill that room with incredibly talented people, what you create becomes limitless. So I apply that every single time I'm thinking about faculty, or every time I'm thinking about a conference or a symposium that we want to plan, or co-authors on a paper. It's like you are a better leader by having a great team, So I think that's the greatest lesson I learned from all of that. And Michael Jackson also applied that same lesson, in his world. It was always to us like, get the best person, hire the best person. Don't try to do it ourselves. And I just think that's a great life lesson for any creative project you ever try to do.
It's so important. And I think especially, when most people imagine going into music, especially, teenagers and people in their 20s, they want to be the front man, like the next Taylor Swift, the next Beyonce, be the leader. And I think you entered into the industry not only because of the amazing Bureau of Labor statistics, but also with the mindset of like wanting to be a part of a team, which I think is a really unique quality.
Yeah, it was never about me. But you know what, that point, I mean, I have a million stories, like, of when that came up. But as a recording engineer or a producer, you're always thinking that way because you're not the performer, right? So it's always about, for a good producer, there are certainly producers out there who think about themselves. But for a good producer, it's always about, what environment can I create that allows this performer to tell the story? Because that's ultimately why people listen to music or they see a play or a movie. It's like you're facilitating the story. And in the film world, it's the producer and the director who are helping facilitate that. But in the music world, it's the recording engineer and the producer. But I had like it's interesting that you said that. Like there was a moment when I was making this transition from music to Chinese medicine. I was driving down the 10. I remember it like so vividly. And on the radio, like for whatever reason, like right in a row were 3 artists that I worked with. And I remember the first one was Christina Aguilera. And the second one was Zed. But the song was written by an artist that I had helped develop and got her record deal, Skylar Grey. And I don't remember the third one, but there were 3 in a row. And to hear them back to back on the radio was such a pivotal moment. I was so proud. I was just like, oh my God, these are 3 people that for a moment in my life, like I helped facilitate their dream, their aspirations, their ability to tell stories. And here I am, like as just the listener, as the third party getting to hear that back. And it was a really like pivotal moment for me. Because I really understood that in such a, I don't know, there was just such a moment of like, yeah, this never was about me. It was always about them. And here I am getting this response back, as just a listener on the radio. It was really magical. It was a really cool moment.
I'm curious because, you're in the music industry, like an industry that a lot of people would kill to be in the midst of the glitz and glamour with all of these titans. What makes you leave and makes you come into Chinese medicine? What really like pushed you to be like, I want to leave and go do something different?
Yeah, there were definitely like a few pivotal moments. So I met a song. I married my writing partner. We got together in 95 while I was working on Quincy's album. We started writing songs together. We met Christina Aguilera. We helped her. We did her demo. We got her signed to RCA. And we worked on her first 3 records. So we were like, the 2 of us, we were a writing team. We worked together 7 days a week, again, 20 hours a day. It was an intense life because there was no release from it. When I think most couples come home from work, they talk a little bit about work and then they watch movies and they have life stuff. We never had that release. We just worked. And about the 1999, 2000, as we were working on Christina's second record, I was really unhealthy. I mean, again, working 7 days a week, not working out at all. I kind of let go of martial arts because of my work schedule. And I was just starting to feel like, how long can you do this? Most of the engineers I knew were, that were older than me were out of shape. They'd been divorced 3 times. They didn't talk to their kids. And I was like, that's no way to live, right? So what can I do? How do I try to find balance? And finding balance for me was coming back to martial arts and meditation. So I started doing that, and I did. At the time, I lived in the South Bay in Hermosa Beach, and I started doing Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's martial art. We moved back up to Hollywood, and I started doing Hung Gar and Tai Chi, and that. When you start to work out, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi or anything else, like it starts to shift your life, right? You stop, maybe you think about not having a glass of wine with dinner because you don't want to feel terrible in the morning, or you start to like shift your diet, like, I'm going to work out in the morning. I don't want to feel too heavy. So like there's just, if you're taking those things seriously, like a lifestyle starts to sink in. And then I started doing yoga. So I was working out basically 7 days a week, like either morning or night, I had something going on: yoga, Tai Chi, Kung Fu. And my life just started to shift. And my now ex was like, well, what's going on? Like, we're not working as much. And I'm like, well, we're working, but I'm going to take a break right now and go do yoga for an hour and a half. And it started to shift our life together. It started to shift my work balance, the work-life relationship, the balance there. And I began to think about, like, well, what if I'm not a musician the rest of my life? What if I'm not working in a recording studio 7 days a week? And then from there were two like moments. Number one was streaming, right? With Napster at the time, and then what became Pandora and Spotify and all of those streaming services. I could foresee that this thing that we were working in the 90s and early 2000s was not going to last. This whole model that we were working on is going to fall apart. And I could already see the budgets beginning to shrink. So I began to think, if the whole industry kind of implodes, which it did, when is the time to get out of that? And what would I do? And because in my brain, I was thinking, I don't want to be in my mid 50s, which here I am. I don't want to be in my mid 50s and trying to reinvent my life or career then. I wanted some lead up time in my 30s and 40s. And that proved completely prophetic somehow, because royalties or projects that we would have made, projects that we were getting paid like $20,000 to do in the early 2000s, people are now doing for free or a few $1,000s. So there was no way to make a living doing that kind of thing. And then the other piece that was really pivotal is for me was the tsunami that occurred in Southeast Asia. My Tai Chi teacher had a lot of connections in Sri Lanka. So when the tsunami hit, we kind of filled him up with supplies, and he went down to Sri Lanka to do aid work within like 2 days of the tsunami hitting. And then we followed him a couple months later with a small group. And that trip was the absolute pivotal moment. We got to Sri Lanka. I had been to Europe a couple times, and of course all around America, but I had never been to Southeast Asia, and I'd certainly never been to a country like Sri Lanka. And the first 24 hours, or I remember calling my wife the second night we were there, and I was like, I think I've made a mistake. I don't know if I can survive here. Like, don't be afraid to if you don't hear from me, like, call the embassy and have them send a helicopter. It was really tough. I mean, we landed in Sri Lanka. We were in Colombo, the capital city, and then we drove across country to the eastern provinces, to Bataclan, which was still in the middle of a civil war and now recovering from the tsunami. We were stopped in the middle of the night in the middle of a swamp by people we think were rebels, like taking our passports. There was, still the eastern provinces were just devastated. There was no hospital care. There was just little clinics set up, people living in all of like the UNICEF tents, kind of, it was just devastation. And I was like, how did I get here? But then over the course of like that 3-week trip, I began to see and obviously feel like how helping people changes you, right? Your outlook on things, everything begins to shift when you're helping to that degree. And then, a couple things within that trip were pivotal, because the first thing was, everyone there who had everybody that we were working with there, they'd lost everything. Yet their first instinct was to help everybody else. So we would go into a village that had just been devastated, and we were bringing, water and food and supplies, and, like, you'd begin to work with people, getting everybody the things they needed. And, you'd hand a case of water to someone and they go, oh, no, not me. You have to give the water to this family. Like, I'm dying, and this won't save me. So it's better if it goes here, because this will help this whole family. And that family would be like, oh, absolutely not. Like, we're younger and we're in good shape, so it needs to go to you. They would fight over who was supposed to get the supplies, not because they wanted them, but because they wanted their neighbors to be happy and healthy and taken care of. And that was like, my God, like, you can imagine. I mean, think back to COVID when we had the toilet paper disaster, right? like here I am in Sri Lanka, in this developing country that's never been, nobody here has ever been financially well off, and yet when presented with all of these relief supplies and access to supplies, they still want to give it all away. So that was just beautiful to see and hard to come home to the States. But then the other thing was, my Tai Chi teacher, who Master Z, we went and visited a Western clinic that had been set up in what had survived of a hospital. And the hospital itself, most of it was totally destroyed and under sand, and there were places you couldn't go because they had not recovered all of the people who'd passed there. So it was a really sad scene. But we walk into this clinic, and there's a single doctor there, Sri Lankan, and there's a row of benches. And, we said, well, what are these people here for? How are you helping them? And he said, well, I can't help anybody right now because we've run out of medicine. And all I have here is Pepsi. So if you have a stomach ache, you get a Pepsi. If you have a headache, you get a Pepsi. Pepsi was his answer. So Z, went up to the first person on the bench and, said, what are you here for? And the person was like, oh, I have shoulder pain. And he jammed his thumb into, an acupressure point and put his fingers on LI15. And, he tells the person who's sitting next to him, see where my fingers are? You need to put your fingers there and just hold them for 5 minutes and then release and then hold for another 5 minutes. And so they started doing that. And he goes to the next guy and he's like, what's your problem? Why are you here? And he's like, oh, I have this terrible headache. And he's like, okay, you're going to jam your thumbs in right here and you're just to hold them there. He's doing GB20. And he's like, if that doesn't work, you're going to go here to Hugu. So he just worked his way down this bench, and everybody got something. Qigong, breathing, acupressure, tuina, every single person in the clinic was helped within 30 minutes. And the Western doc was just like, what just happened here? But for me, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to fly in anywhere in the world without supplies and be able to help people. Needles help, herbs help, teas, all those things help. But I want to be able to affect a room with just my hands or just exercise or just breathing or something like that. So I came home from that trip like a completely changed person. And the change was so drastic. When I got off the plane, I remember coming out of Bradley International Airport, and my wife was standing outside the front door, and she's right in front of me, and she's going like this. And I'm like, right here. And she didn't even recognize me. That's how transformational that trip was. And I remember talking to her that night over dinner, and I was like, I can't do the same things that we did before this trip. I can't go back to, I'm not saying I want to quit music, but I can't be that person. I need to find who I'm going to be, because that person and this person I am coming back from that trip, they're not the same person. So that began the transition towards coming to Chinese medicine school. It took time. I had to unravel my life. We did eventually get divorced. I just had to prepare myself, for acupuncture school and what was to come.
I think these two pivotal moments that you bring up are still factors that are driving people into Chinese medicine today. And I think one of which is the advent of technology and AI, and people wanting AI-proof jobs, which I think if you go around on campus, the big joke is no robot is going to be able to become an acupuncturist, hopefully. And then I think the second one is really just the state of the world, the post-COVID world, how frustrating and confusing healthcare is in general, no matter where you are in the world. And I think if you basically talk to most people coming into, any Chinese medicine school, that is within their, reasoning for why they're choosing to pursue this career.
Yeah, I've joked to a lot of different people about like who comes to Chinese medicine school. So there's me, there's the martial artist, right, or the yoga teacher, or the Reiki or Pilates teacher. And immediately think of your classmates. They're like, yeah, I see all of them, right? So there's those people. There's somebody who's been in an allied healthcare like massage therapy and wants to add to their toolbox. They know what they can do with their hands, and now they want to add to the toolbox. So you've got those people. Then you've got the people that have like absolute distrust of Western medicine, but want to help people. And then you've got the people who've either themselves or a family member has been helped by Chinese medicine, and they want to, kind of build on that. So there's only like a few personalities, right? And then, in smaller groups, of course, we have, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and now more and more American students who their parents, right, somehow got involved in Chinese medicine, and they're kind of fulfilling or moving into that lineage as well. And we've certainly seen a lot of like second and third generation students, beginning to take the programs as acupuncture gets more mature. But yeah, there's something about the personalities and the I don't know, that come into Chinese medicine, and you start to see these similarities across all the different cohorts. But I also think it's hard for us, right? Like we live in a Western society. We have Western medicine and biomedicine, and then we're doing this thing that for many feels kind of intangible, probably amorphous at sometimes, Chinese medicine. So I think it's important. What I try to do is I keep my feet like in both worlds. Like it's very common for me to like do a Daoist ritual in the morning, and after that I'm actually peer reviewing a scientific journal. Like I think it's important to have your feet in both those worlds, because ultimately we're the translators of Chinese medicine to the Western world. And the more understanding you have of both languages, the greater your ability to put that medicine forward.
Do you think that coming from a creative background keeps you grounded and able to, go between both worlds? Like, do you think that was a strength coming into this medicine, or was there a little bit of struggle?
Well, being a creative person, I didn't know how to study. I still don't know how to study. I was I was a good student because I got it, but like I didn't know how to. I came back to school at 40 years old. I had no idea how to study. I'd never studied for anything in my life. The only class I ever studied for my undergrad was accounting and macroeconomics. So Chinese medicine to me was like a whole new, like there's all this memorization, and like I've had to find a lot of tools to ground myself in that. But I think the creative side of me is fulfilled in that, like, you can never see the end of this, right? You can never read all the books. You can never learn every modality. Like, it's constant. It's creative in that, of course, diagnosis treatment is creative, but it's creative in that the amount of material, the repertoire to go through is endless, and you could spend the rest of your life studying this and never get all the way through. I mean, anecdotally, I think 99% of our medicine has never even been translated. So it's endless, and I think that fulfills a little bit of my creative juices. Like, it just keeps it like, what can I read next? What can I translate next?
Well, and it's interesting to sit in classes next to Western medical doctors that are like, wait, what? Like, this isn't all the material that we have. I thought this was it. And it's interesting to see the intersection of the personalities of, like, someone who is a little bit more artistic being like, the boundless and endless opportunities here are really exciting. And then also to have a little bit of the Western medical personality to ground us. And be like, well, research is important, and, actually going and taking the steps to translate those things are important.
Well, it's hard for me too sometimes, because I'm a believing non-believer. like I've definitely seen things that don't make sense, right? And that I wouldn't be able to verify with a research project. but I want to verify everything with a research project. So I'm like, I'm constantly stuck in those worlds. I do Daoist medicine. I do talismans. I have a talisman behind me. I have one on my door. I have one right here on my desk. I'm fully engaged with the Chinese Daoist world and spend most of my waking hours trying to come to terms with that as much as a Westerner could. But I'm constantly trying to figure out, how do I prove this in a way that makes sense for biomedicine? Not because it's going to make my treatments better, but because I do want that acceptance. So it's a very strange place for me to be in sometimes, because I'm like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, a controversial example, but it's easy to prove. I'm on the science side of vaccination, right? But the people that would be with me in that side are totally anti-acupuncture, right? They think it doesn't work. So I'm like for me, that's a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde, because I can understand the research enough to go through the science around something that might be controversial in the Western world. But all of those people would absolutely poo-poo what I do in the Chinese medicine world. So that's a very real example that I see almost every day of my life, because I also peer review for scientific journals. So I'm constantly in that world. And that, I think that's really hard to balance. But there's also the cultural side. I forget how you said it, but we were kind of getting there. We were talking about Western medical doctors. This is not all the information. And to me, the most interesting thing about Chinese medicine and Chinese culture is the layers of understanding, and you can read the Tao Te Ching, or any Daoist text or Buddhist text or even Chinese poetry. And there's a kind of a superficial layer of understanding. But then if you actually read the Chinese characters versus a translation, you start to see a whole other level of understanding in the choice of the characters and the choice of the couplets of the characters. And then if you come from a lineage understanding, there's a whole other thing that you're beginning to grasp. And then you add that to practice. So the layers of understanding are endless. And the more you go back to that, the more you gain, from whatever that thing is, that text or that treatment or that practice. So that's also a little bit of the creative side that gets satisfied through that piece.
And what I'm really hearing is that there's a seat for everyone at the table. I think there's a seat for all of the different, perspectives that get brought in. And really, I think Sabine Wilms comes to mind, who's been a guest on this podcast, and her translation work, and, how this coming into this medicine isn't just about being a practitioner. There's so many other avenues to be added to. And I think that's a strength of people coming into this medicine as a second career, and actually even as a first career, and seeing the opportunities that are here to, put your own individual strengths towards
this thing. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point, and is important today, especially where the acupuncture world is headed and the difficulties we're facing around federal regulations and financial aid. For probably 45-ish years, Chinese medicine schools and practitioners have always assumed you go to school and you're going to open your own office on the corner, and that's the path that everybody's going to take. But that's not really a healthy industry, right? Because not everybody can own a business. Not everybody has that aptitude. Not every town needs an acupuncturist on every corner. So who else are we going to be as graduates, right? Some people get out and they work for herb companies, right? Some people get out and they go to the work for hospitals or the VA. And our industry is really just beginning to mature in that way. To not think that everybody who graduates has to be a sole practitioner. I just think we need to go further in that and think about who we are and who we want to be. And I'm starting to see it. I'm starting to see even people have graduated from the doctoral program, and their dissertation their capstone project was the jumping off point for their business, not for their practitioner side, for their business, their creation of a product line in the herbal world, or the creation of a modality of teaching. And I do think that that is a marker of maturity and growth. And it's something we as a profession probably need to think a lot more about. Because does everybody that graduates want to be a practitioner? Probably not, So I'm actually excited for that potential.
Yeah, and maybe you find your way as you have found your way, becoming a practitioner and then being like, okay, like there are other roles that, kind of open up. And then, I think the role that you're in parallels what you did in the music industry, which is quite fascinating, kind of being the team captain and bringing in, the best team that you possibly can.
Yeah, because I never expected to be here. I've said that many times, like ultimately I think my wish was to have a new career that was portable, that I could actually get out of Los Angeles with. Like, I never thought that I would stay here. I thought my wife and I would graduate. I met my wife the first day of acupuncture school. We went through school together. We graduated. We got married in our last year. And I think both of us thought that we would probably graduate and leave Los Angeles, either go back to San Diego, where her family's from, or we talked about like Santa Barbara. We had dreams of like opening a clinic in Hawaii. Like, we were like, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And we actually got a job at Dragon Herbs, the herb company, right before graduation. Actually, we started working there in our last quarter. And that kind of grounded us in Los Angeles a little bit. And then I started my doctoral program, and was really doing that, for me, because it just, like I said, Chinese medicine is endless. I want more training. Like, where do I go? And then in the last trimester of my doctoral program, the dean of that program was leaving, and she said, like, look, I really think you would be a good administrator for this program. If you're interested, I'll put your name in. And I was like, I never thought about it, but like, sure, let's try. And then, she came to me a couple weeks later and she said, look, there's another school that has since closed, so thank God I didn't go there. There's another school that's looking for a doctoral dean, and I know the dean now, and I really think you'd be good if you don't want to come to this program. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's 2 possible job opportunities. And then the position opened up at Yosan, and I got a call and said, hey, we're thinking about a new dean. Would you be interested? And I sat there with Melody, my wife, and said, like, isn't it weird that there's like 3 potential opportunities for me to be the dean of a doctoral program? It's strange. And she's like, well, I mean, if you're looking for signs, like, duh. Like, so I had the meeting at Yosan, and that went really well. And it was here in Los Angeles, close to family and friends. So I said, like, yeah, let's do that. So that was never part of my career trajectory. But somehow I'm here. So, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting if you let it go, right? You let it go and you work hard, right? And you let things go, and the pathways open up for you if you're willing. I think that's important.
And that's the fate, really, of Chinese medicine school that I think we get taught on day one, which is something led you here, and now you're here, and you will be changed. And there's a fate that happens afterwards. I think really with everyone who walks through the doors of an acupuncture school, you just kind of get swept away into who you're meant to be.
Yeah, if you're willing, right? If you're like
willing.
Totally, if you're willing, no, that's the key.
You can
too,
kick and
like,
scream during the journey.
But it's not going to do you any good. You can kick and scream all you want. So in Daoism, we talk about Xing and Ming, and Xing is your innate self, like who you're born with, and for most of us, that gets pretty obscured by our parents and our school teachers and our friends and our environment and our geography, and all of these things kind of obscure who that Xing is, society, right? And then our Ming is our ultimate destiny in this life. But Livia Cohn, who's a great writer and translator of Daoist texts, she calls our Ming our circumstantial trajectory. So it's not the fate of the Greek world or the Roman world where this is written in stone and that's who you're going to become. Your Ming is more of like, it's that those roots or that tree with many branches. You make choices every day about where you're headed, right? And every single thing you do I run this yellow light or do I slow down? Every little thing you do I hold the door for the people behind me, or do I rush up the stairs because I'm late for class? Every little thing you do is affecting that circumstantial trajectory. And the ultimate goal of Taoism, and especially Chunzhen Taoism, is this idea that you're constantly dual cultivating your Xing, your innate self, and your Ming, this kind of circumstantial trajectory, to ultimately lead you to your reason for being here, which for a Taoist is hopefully then to attain realization. So you can kick and scream, or you can make some decisions to make that pathway, I don't know, simpler. I don't know if it's ever simple, but you don't have to kick and scream the whole way. Sometimes you have to, but for me and for so many people here, you're looking for that pathway. You're looking for your life calling, however you want to describe it. And I would say that, if everybody who's come to Chinese medicine school, you're here for something got you here, There's a great story. There's an American Tibetan Buddhist teacher, who was living in a monastery in Asia, and he had been there for like a decade, and his teacher comes to him and says like, we're so proud of the work you've done here, and we're ready to like give you like the highest teaching we have. And he's like, Rinpoche, I'm so happy to get this teaching, thank you. And he brings him to a room in the monastery he's never seen, and they open the door, and there's all these monks doing yoga. And he's like, yoga? Like, that's it? But he says like, oh, Rinpoche, I need to let you know that like in America and across Europe and the world, there's like millions of people doing yoga, so thank you for the teaching, but I need to let you know it's like not so secret anymore. And his teacher, without missing a beat, tells him like, oh, good. They remember when they were here. Right. And it's like, oh yeah, like we're all coming together, from a Daoist and Buddhist perspective, we're all coming together because there's some connection there. There's a reason we all gather here at Yosan, or people gather, at Burning Man, or like whatever it is. Like there's something that's pulling you together. You may think it was your choice or it was a chance, but there's some reason these people are all coming together. I love that story because it's like we're all connected in this just unbelievable way, and how we come together to learn and to teach each other and to treat each other is so important. And that's why I think people walk into a given school and they feel at home. When I came to Chinese medicine school, when I came to Yosan, I was like, that's my place. Like there was no question to me. And I think people are going to feel that differently, no matter where they go. But for me, Yosan was that place.
Yeah, I think the secret of Chinese medicine school is not so secretly community.
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'm still like friends with almost everybody I graduated with. Some of them are here teaching and working in the clinic and things like that. And, your ability to create community, or the community that you might fall into when you go to Chinese medicine school, when you go into any big project, whether it's making a record or creating an art exhibit or working on a film, it's the same thing. I don't know if you watched the Oscars last night, but like you listen to every single person who got on that stage, and they thank their family and they thank the writers and producers, and then they say, thank you to the family, that we built on this movie, right? Because you're embedded in this deeply emotional, stressful, transformational process, and it's community that helps you get through that. So I just think it's essential. Finding that community.
Mic drop.
But also but I think even for your practice too, like when I meet new students at orientation, I tell them that first day of Chinese medicine school, like, look, you're going to graduate in 4 years, but you should be thinking today about what kind of practitioner you want to be. Now that's going to change over the 4 years, but you should be thinking about that every single day. Who's my people? Where am I going to practice? What kind of things do I want to work on? Right? Like if you're figuring that out in your 4th year or your last trimester, it's way too late. Right? Now you probably got 2-3 years of work before you can even get serious about, a practice. But if you're thinking about that from day one and allow those changes and transformations to happen, you're way ahead of the game. And I think that's an important piece to becoming a successful practitioner.
So let's circle back to Taoism. So how does that play into Chinese medicine, both as a whole and how you practice the medicine?
Yeah. So my original forays into Taoism were mostly unsuccessful. I started meditating when I was 15, probably because I saw it on a movie somewhere. I don't know, maybe Steven Seagal or something ridiculous. But I had no teachers or no outlet for it. And then as I got into Tai Chi, later in life, meditation, ascending meditation became a part of that. And then I began to learn kind of the roots of that through Buddhism and Taoism. And still early on, Taoism, early 2000s, there's still no real outlet for it. Most Americans think of Taoism as Qigong, right? And there's much more to it. And then I started to visit China and visit temples and kind of have conversations with monks and nuns there, but still with language barriers. And I just wasn't getting the in. I knew it was there. And then I came to Chinese medicine school and, there was more inroads there, but I still felt kind of really outside it. And I really developed much more of a Buddhist practice early on because it was so much more accessible. There's so much more written and translated. I did a pilgrimage in Japan the year before I came to Chinese medicine school. There's an island there called Shikoku, and it's kind of south of Osaka and Kyoto. And you basically walk around mostly the edge of this island and visit 88 temples following in the steps of a Buddhist saint. And I walked almost 1,000 miles in 40 days, kind of insane. So my Buddhist practice was deeper, but only because it was just more accessible than Taoism at the time. But then as I graduated Chinese medicine school, there's this incredible renaissance of translation that's happening right now. Purple Cloud Press and the work of my teachers, Jack Schaefer and Josh Painter. There's so much translation happening of Daoist texts and access to the practice that finally, in 2019, that really, the door started to open for Daoist practice for me. So now I have a very an altar heavy ritual practice that I do. I'm constantly studying the scriptures and the texts. And so your question was how does that fit in? It changes everything about how you practice, how you approach the practice. So the first piece for me that's important is I don't want to appropriate this medicine. No matter in anything that I've ever done, whether it's surfing or music or Kung Fu and now Chinese medicine and Taoism, I want to know everything I can about that culture that gave birth to it as much as possible. I'm going to read everything. I'm going to study with every teacher I can find. I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. I'm doing it in the most authentic way that I possibly can. And for Chinese medicine and Taoism, that includes understanding Chinese history, Chinese cultural norms, the language, both classical Chinese and modern Mandarin, diving into the texts that haven't been translated, so that I can approach it with respect. Because ultimately, as Americans, we're going to change the medicine, right? I've said this maybe controversial in other podcasts, I don't even really think we practice Chinese medicine. I don't. I think we practice an American form of medicine that involves acupuncture, herbs, cupping, tuina, gua sha. It's Chinese adjacent. it uses a lot of the same modalities and herbs, but like our practices here are quite different than what's practiced even in the Chinese diaspora in America or in other countries. So if we know we're going to change something, we know we're not embedded in the culture, we should probably be as informed as we possibly can be before we make those changes. So that's kind of how I approach the whole thing. And it's why my office is, filled with books, and I'm constantly studying and going to China. But then the practice itself, like actually treating patients, just becomes so much deeper. I'm understanding, I'm not choosing a point based on a number, right? I'm choosing a point based on its name, and I know its name is referenced here, and that reference actually draws me back to the I Ching. Like, there's this intertextual conversation that happens within Chinese medicine and Taoism that unless you're translating and looking at characters, you'll never get that. So I think for me, that's where the study and practice of Taoism has helped me, is to understand those layers, coming back to the idea of layers, understanding all these layers of practice, layers of studying that lead to layers of practice that lead to layers of treatment, right? You can't go to that deepest level of treatment until you've gone through all those layers of study and practice.
And I think that's a great complement to the idea that as much as we can bring new perspectives to this medicine to, further its growth, you have to go back to the roots and to find the meaning in it as well. And those processes can happen simultaneously.
Yeah, because in America, like, we're so good at, like, we've all seen this before. Like, somebody goes to China and they come back, they're a master of something. And it's like, you were there for 2 weeks. Like, maybe it's possible, but probably not, right? Like, what are the chances? Like, we joke about this in the martial arts world. Like, you look at somebody and they say, like, oh, I met this monk in the mountains and they taught me their family secrets, and now I'm here to share it to the world. And it's like, so let me get this straight. Chinese guy walking in the mountains meets you who don't speak Chinese, and he just gives you his entire martial art and family secret, and now you're here to spread it to the world and have conferences and charge people $10,000.
Translated it correctly.
Yeah, like, that really happened. Is it possible? Sure, but if you know Chinese culture at all, it's about embedding yourself there. It's about showing up. It's about doing the work, and hopefully these things kind of get unveiled to you. That's the thing that drives me so often, is like, there absolutely are secrets. There are going to be, right? Because those things in the wrong hands get misused. But the only way you're going to get to those levels of again, practice or treatment is if you just continually show up, do the work, in our case, do the translations, and then maybe you get lucky and you start to see some of those little pieces poking through, and then you meet a teacher who's willing to invest their time in you to show you those things. But if you approach it kind of like, oh, it's a hobby, or I'm not really interested in that piece. I hear people say, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to translate, or I don't want to do research, or I don't want to do that. It's like, you just shut a door, So I'm here to open doors. Like, I want all the doors open. I want everybody, the students, faculty, I want everybody to have all the opportunities they can. So I'm always going to be trying to open those doors.
As a closing question, what would be your advice to somebody considering or walking into Chinese medicine school for the first time and considering devoting their life to it?
I would say first and foremost, which ties into the conversation that we just had, like, you have to be willing to give everything, right? It's not a superficial gig, right? You're not going to go to work 9 to 5 and leave it behind. It's going to be all encompassing. And if I would personally say, like, if you don't feel that you can go there, then maybe it's not the right place to be. What level are you willing to give, to it? In the Tao Te Ching, it says, like, what are you willing to lose? What are you willing to give up? And I think the vastness of Chinese medicine, and then if you start to roll in Taoism, Buddhism, all of these things, the vastness of these practices does require you to let go of some things. For me, I had to let go of music. I like to really dive into the level that I wanted to be. It took a long time. I've had to let go of a lot of things that I used to do. But I just think that being exceptional at it requires that. And maybe that scares some people off. But I think if you really love it, if you're really into it, there's nothing more that you'd rather do.